Jake Patterson was 25 years old, a freshly returned elite sniper from Ranger Battalion. He came to the shooting range with confidence because he knew his abilities. He could hit targets at 800 meters, praised in military training as a true professional. But that morning, when he looked at the target paper of the old man shooting quietly in the lane next to him, he paused. That level of accuracy shouldn't be possible. Not at that age, not with that equipment, not with such a relaxed stance. It was impossible. Until the old man set down his rifle to take a drink of water, and Jake saw the marking on his wrist. Welcome to Veteran Stories. Before we dive into this incredible story of hidden mastery, unspoken legends, and the moment when experience meets youth, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories about silent warriors deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button. Some legends never retire. They just wait to be discovered. The Precision Shooting Center in Colorado Springs opened its doors at 6 a.m. sharp, just as it had every day for the past 15 years. Jake Patterson arrived at 6:15, carrying his custom .308 rifle case and range bag filled with hand-loaded ammunition. At 25, he was everything the modern military sniper program produced: technically proficient, equipment-obsessed, and confident in his abilities. Jake had just completed his second deployment with the 75th Ranger Regiment, where he'd served as a designated marksman. His shooting scores were consistently in the top 5% of his unit, and his record for long-distance accuracy had earned him respect among his peers and superiors. He signed in at the front desk, grabbed his safety glasses and ear protection, and headed to his preferred lane, Lane 12, which offered the longest sight lines in the facility. As he unpacked his equipment with practiced efficiency, he noticed the range was quieter than usual for a Tuesday morning. Most of the lanes were empty except for a few regular shooters Jake recognized, mostly law enforcement officers getting in their qualification rounds, and a couple of competitive shooters preparing for weekend matches. And then there was the old man in Lane 7. Jake had seen him before, always in the same lane, always alone. The man appeared to be in his early 60s with graying hair and wearing simple civilian clothes, worn jeans, a plain button-down shirt, and scuffed leather boots that looked like they'd seen decades of use. What struck Jake wasn't the man's appearance, but his equipment. While Jake carried a state-of-the-art precision rifle with a high-end scope worth more than most people's monthly salary, the old man used what appeared to be a vintage M1 Garand, the kind of rifle Jake had only seen in museums and World War II documentaries. The old man's routine was as simple as his equipment. He would arrive precisely at 6:30, set up without fanfare, fire exactly 30 shots, clean his rifle methodically, and leave by 8. He never spoke to anyone, never asked for help, and never seemed to notice the occasional curious glances from other shooters. Jake had initially dismissed him as probably some military history enthusiast, or maybe a veteran from decades past trying to relive old memories, but something about the man's demeanor suggested otherwise. That Tuesday morning, Jake was working on his 300-yard precision shooting when he heard the distinctive ping of the Garand's ejected clip from Lane 7. It was a sound that always caught his attention, not because it was loud, but because of its historical significance. Curious, Jake lowered his rifle and glanced over at the old man's target. What he saw made him blink and look again. At 200 yards, the target showed a single hole. Not a tight group, a single hole. 8 shots, all through the exact same point of impact. Jake knew enough about shooting to understand what he was seeing. This wasn't luck, and it wasn't a fluke. This was precision that bordered on the supernatural. Even with modern equipment and years of training, Jake couldn't consistently achieve that level of accuracy. "Excuse me," Jake called out during a ceasefire. "Sir, that's incredible shooting." The old man looked up from his rifle and nodded politely. "Thank you. What's your secret? I mean, with equipment like that, to get precision like that." "Practice," the old man replied simply, returning to his cleaning routine. Jake couldn't let it go. As a professional marksman, he understood the variables that affected accuracy: wind, temperature, ammunition consistency, rifle harmonics, human factors. What he'd witnessed defied several of those variables. "Have you been shooting long?" Jake asked. "A while." "Military background?" The old man paused in his cleaning and looked at Jake directly for the first time. "You could say that?" Jake waited for more, but the old man returned to his rifle maintenance. There was something in that brief exchange, not rudeness, but the kind of careful response Jake had learned to recognize in veterans who'd seen classified operations. "I'm Jake, by the way. Army Rangers, 75th Regiment." "Henry," the old man replied without looking up. "Good outfit, the 75th. The way Henry said it, with the casual familiarity of someone who knew the unit's reputation intimately, made Jake pay closer attention. "Mind if I ask what range you're shooting at?" Jake inquired. 200 today. Sometimes I stretch it to 500 inches. Jake glanced at the 500-yard targets downrange. They were steel silhouettes, challenging even for experienced shooters with modern equipment. "With the Garand?" "It's a good rifle. Served its purpose." Henry finished cleaning his rifle and began packing his gear. As he rolled up his shooting mat, Jake noticed something that made his breath catch. On Henry's left wrist, partially concealed by his shirt cuff, was a faded tattoo. It wasn't large or elaborate, just a simple design that took Jake a moment to recognize. When he did, everything changed. The tattoo was a skull wearing a green beret, with a small scroll underneath bearing the words "De Oppresso Liber," the motto of U.S. Army Special Forces. But it wasn't just any Special Forces tattoo. The specific design, the faded quality, and the placement told Jake this wasn't some modern ink job. This was old school, the kind of marking that came from an era when Special Forces was smaller, more secretive, and infinitely more selective. "Sir," Jake said quietly, his tone completely changed. "That tattoo—" Henry paused in his packing and followed Jake's gaze to his wrist. For a moment, something flickered across his features, not embarrassment, but the look of someone whose privacy had been unexpectedly breached. "Vietnam era?" Jake asked respectfully. Henry studied Jake for a long moment, as if weighing how much to reveal. Finally, he nodded once. "Special Forces?" Another nod. "What team?" "Several," Henry said. "Different times, different places." Jake felt like he was standing in the presence of military history. Vietnam-era Special Forces operators were legendary figures, the original Green Berets who'd written the book on unconventional warfare, counterinsurgency, and precision marksmanship under impossible conditions. "That's why you shoot like that," Jake said, more to himself than to Henry. "I shoot like this because I had good teachers and enough practice to not embarrass them," Henry replied. There was something in the way he said "teachers," with reverence and sadness, that suggested those instructors were no longer alive to see their students' continued excellence. "Would you—" Jake started, then stopped, unsure how to phrase his request. "What?" "Would you mind if I watched you shoot sometime?" "I mean, really watched? I could learn something." Henry considered this for a moment. "You shoot well enough? Saw your targets?" "Not like that," Jake said, gesturing toward Henry's single-hole target. "Not even close." "Come in Thursday morning," Henry said. "Same time. Bring your rifle, but also bring something with iron sights if you have it." "Iron sights?" "Electronics fail. Optics break. Iron sights work when nothing else does." Thursday morning, Jake arrived early, carrying both his precision rifle and an M4 carbine with backup iron sights. Henry was already in Lane 7, setting up his Garand with the same methodical precision Jake had observed before. "Range estimation," Henry said without preamble. "Tell me the distance to that steel target." Jake pulled out his laser rangefinder. 347 yards. "Put the rangefinder away. Use your eyes." Jake studied the target using the mil-dot estimation techniques he'd learned in sniper school. 350 yards, give or take. "Close enough." "Wind?" Jake checked his wind meter and weather app. 3 to 5 miles per hour, left to right. "Electronics again. Feel the wind. Watch the grass. Read the mirage." For the next hour, Henry walked Jake through marksmanship fundamentals that weren't taught in modern sniper schools, not because they weren't effective, but because they'd been replaced by technology. Natural point of aim without bipods or rests, reading environmental conditions without instruments, calculating bullet drop and wind drift through experience rather than ballistic computers. Your generation learns to shoot with crutches, Henry observed. Good crutches, don't misunderstand. But crutches nonetheless. What happens when the crutches break? You learn to walk without them, or you don't walk at all. Henry loaded 8 rounds into his Garand and assumed his shooting position. No shooting mat, no bipod, no advanced sighting system, just the rifle, the shooter, and decades of internalized knowledge. The first shot rang out, followed by 7 more in steady succession. The distinctive ping of the empty clip being ejected marked the end of the string. Jake lowered his binoculars. Another single hole. Over the following weeks, Jake became a regular fixture beside Henry at Lane 7. Their conversations were brief but revealing, painting a picture of military service that belonged to a different era. Henry had enlisted in 1968, volunteered for Special Forces, and spent the next 6 years in places that didn't officially exist on military maps. His teams had operated in Cambodia and Laos, conducting reconnaissance missions, training indigenous forces, and engaging in direct action operations that remained classified decades after the fact. We didn't have the luxury of perfect intelligence or unlimited ammunition, Henry explained during one session. Every shot had to count, because we might not get another chance. How many deployments? Deployments weren't what we called them then. You went where they sent you, stayed until the mission was complete, then went somewhere else. Jake began to understand that Henry's shooting ability wasn't just about technique, it was about survival. Every fundamental he'd mastered had been learned under conditions where missing meant people died. Word began to spread around the range about the old man in Lane 7, not through gossip or bragging, but through the quiet recognition that exists between professionals. Other shooters, police officers, competitive marksmen, current and former military, began arriving earlier on Tuesdays and Thursdays, not to gawk, but to witness something increasingly rare, absolute mastery practiced without fanfare. One Thursday morning, Jake arrived to find 3 other Rangers waiting near Lane 7. They'd driven down from Fort Carson after hearing rumors about an old-school shooter who was making professionals look like amateurs. Henry acknowledged them with the same polite nod he gave everyone, then proceeded with his normal routine. 30 shots, single hole, methodical cleanup. As he packed his gear, one of the Rangers approached respectfully. "Sir, we heard you were Special Forces, Vietnam era." Henry nodded. "Which unit?" "5th Group mostly. Some time with MACV-SOG." The Rangers exchanged glances. MACV-SOG, Military Assistance Command, Vietnam, Studies and Observations Group, was legendary among special operations communities. It was the unit that conducted the deepest, most dangerous missions of the Vietnam War. "Sir," the senior ranger said, "would you mind if we bought you coffee after you're done here?" Henry considered the request. "Why?" "Because we'd like to hear how things were done back then, if you're willing to share." That afternoon, in a small diner near the range, Henry found himself surrounded by young professionals eager to learn from their predecessor. The conversation wasn't about war stories or glory. It was about tactics, techniques, and procedures that had been developed through hard experience. Jake listened as Henry described shooting fundamentals that weren't found in any modern manual, navigation techniques that didn't rely on GPS, and communication methods that worked when radios failed. The equipment was different, Henry said, but the principles remain the same. Know your weapon, know your environment, know your limits, and practice until you don't have to think about any of it. Word continued to spread, but carefully and respectfully. Henry's presence at the range became something of an open secret among the military and law enforcement communities. Not a spectacle, but a resource. Young snipers would time their range sessions to coincide with Henry's schedule, hoping to learn something that couldn't be taught in schools. Henry, initially resistant to the attention, gradually warmed to the role of informal instructor. "Your scope is too powerful for this distance," he told a police sniper one morning. "You're thinking like a target shooter, not an operator. Less magnification, wider field of view, faster target acquisition. To a competitive shooter struggling with wind calls, stop calculating and start feeling. The wind doesn't care about your charts. To Jake, during a particularly frustrating session, you're trying too hard to be perfect. Perfect is the enemy of effective. Make the shot that matters, not the shot that impresses. 6 months after their first encounter, Jake had become something more than a student. He was Henry's unofficial assistant, helping newer shooters understand the lessons being offered. "You've learned the important part," Henry told him one morning, which is that marksmanship isn't about the equipment or the scores. It's about being reliable when reliability matters. Jake had indeed learned. His own shooting had improved dramatically, not just in accuracy but in consistency and speed. More importantly, he'd developed the kind of confidence that came from understanding his capabilities thoroughly. One Thursday, a reporter from a military magazine showed up, having heard rumors about the legendary marksman at the local range. Henry politely declined an interview and continued with his routine. "Why don't you want the recognition?" Jake asked later. "Because the mission was never about recognition. It was about getting the job done." "I want you to try something," Henry said one morning, handing Jake an old M14 rifle. "Iron sights only, 400 yards, standing position." Jake had never attempted such a shot. Modern sniper training emphasized prone positions, stabilized platforms, and optimal conditions. This was asking him to make a precision shot under deliberately difficult circumstances. "I don't think I can make that shot." "I know you can't. That's not the point." "What is the point?" "To understand your actual limits, not your comfortable limits." Jake took the rifle, assumed a standing position, and tried to find his natural point of aim. The target seemed impossibly small through the iron sights. The rifle felt unstable, without support, and his breathing seemed too loud and irregular. He fired 5 shots and managed to keep them all on the target, though spread across an area the size of a dinner plate. "Not bad," Henry said. "Now watch." Henry took the same rifle, assumed the same position, and fired 5 shots that grouped within a space smaller than a coffee cup. How? 47 years of practice. As autumn approached, Henry made an announcement that surprised everyone. "I'm thinking about retiring from coming here so regularly," he told Jake. "Time to step back." "Why now?" "Because you and the others have learned what you needed to learn, and because I'm 67 years old and my eyes aren't what they used to be." Jake felt a sense of loss that surprised him. Over the months, Henry had become more than an instructor. He'd become a connection to military traditions and standards that were rapidly disappearing. "Before you go," Jake said, "would you tell me about your worst shot? The one that taught you the most?" Henry was quiet for a long moment. "Cambodia, 1971. Night mission, single shot opportunity, distance unknown, wind gusting. I rushed the shot because we were compromised and had to move immediately." "Did you hit the target?" "Number and 3 good men spent an extra week in enemy territory because of my impatience." "What did you learn?" "That sometimes the most important shot is the one you don't take until you're absolutely certain you can make it." Henry's last regular day at the range drew a larger crowd than usual. Word had spread through the military community that the old master was stepping back, and people came to pay their respects. He went through his normal routine, 30 shots, single hole, but this time, when he finished, he did something unprecedented. He walked to each lane where other shooters were working and offered a brief word of encouragement or instruction. To Jake, he said, "Remember that marksmanship is a discipline, not a skill. Skills fade without practice. Discipline endures." He left his shooting mat with Jake, along with a small notebook filled with handwritten observations about wind reading, natural point of aim, and other fundamentals that weren't found in any manual. "Keep learning," Henry said as he packed his Garand for the last time, "and when you're ready, start teaching." Jake continued to shoot at Lane 7, now serving as the informal keeper of Henry's lessons. Other shooters would ask about the old man, and Jake would share what he'd learned about consistency, fundamentals, and the difference between shooting for scores and shooting for effect. Months later, Jake received an unexpected phone call. The caller identified himself as a representative from the Special Forces Association. "We understand you knew Henry Morrison," the voice said. "Morrison? I knew him as Henry, but I never got his last name." "Sergeant Major Henry Morrison, retired. He passed away last week. Heart attack, very peaceful. We found your name in his personal effects as someone who might want to know." Jake felt the loss like a physical blow. Was there a service? "Small, private, family only. But we thought you might want to know something about who he was." "I'd like that." Sergeant Major Morrison was awarded 3 Silver Stars, 2 Bronze Stars with V device, and a Purple Heart during his service in Vietnam. His teams completed 47 classified missions without losing a single team member. After retirement, he worked as a civilian contractor training special operations units until he was 60. But here's what might interest you most. In his personal notes, he wrote about a young ranger he'd been mentoring at a shooting range. He wrote that teaching you had been one of the most rewarding experiences of his later years. Jake stood in Lane 7 the following Tuesday, looking at the target that still bore Henry's final group. 8 holes through the same point of impact. Other shooters nodded respectfully as they passed, understanding that this was both an ending and a beginning. Because real mastery isn't just about personal achievement. It's about passing on knowledge, maintaining standards, and ensuring that the next generation understands the difference between technology and skill, between equipment and expertise. Henry Morrison never sought recognition for his service or his teaching. He simply showed up, did the work, and trusted that the right people would learn the right lessons. And in Lane 7 at the Precision Shooting Center, where a faded shooting mat still marks the spot where a master practiced his craft, those lessons continue every Tuesday and Thursday morning. Have you ever met someone like Henry? Someone whose quiet competence revealed depths of experience you never suspected? Someone who taught you that real expertise doesn't announce itself, it simply performs? Tell us in the comments. Share their story. Because at Veteran Stories, we believe that the greatest teachers are often the ones who never call themselves teachers. Subscribe if stories like this matter to you. Because in every community, there are masters walking among us, and they deserve to be recognized for what they've given, not just in their careers, but in the knowledge they continue to share.